Hi there, I'm Ona Ambrazeite, President of the Johns Hopkins Science Policy and Diplomacy Group and also co-director of the Johns Hopkins Science Diplomacy Hub, both of which aim to strengthen the connection between the worlds of science, policy, and diplomacy by building bridges between the very individuals working in these sectors. So welcome to the On Record Science Policy and Diplomacy Briefing Series, where we host distinguished guests to learn more about their perspectives on science policy, science diplomacy, how these fields integrate into their line of work, and any other insights they may have with regards to scientists working together with policymakers. So now I'm very excited to introduce our distinguished guest today, who I'm really looking forward to hosting here at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg Center in the heart of Washington, D.C. And that's Ambassador Jacques Peteloup, who has been the ambassador of Switzerland to the United States since 2019. Ambassador, you're one of the most engaging, fun, and active ambassadors I've interacted with. So welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So just so the audience knows a little bit more about your background, you have a very impressive diplomatic career. You have been the Swiss ambassador to Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Somalia, and Seychelles, right? As well as Director General of the Director for Resources within the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. And importantly, you have been really active in our various science diplomacy events hosted here at the Bloomberg Center as part of our Johns Hopkins Science Diplomacy Hub activities. So to start us off, in general, what is your perspective about science diplomacy from what you've seen during your time in different countries in Washington, and why is it even important to work in such a young field that a lot of people don't know about?
I think it's a relatively young field. It has been there for quite a long time, but now it has taken a dimension that goes way, way, way beyond anything that traditional diplomacy was doing before. In fact, I'm not sure whether many people have taken the measure of the scientific and industrial revolution that we are on the eve of, which is about to, it has begun, which is about to develop its full potential. And I do believe personally that the industrial revolution we are seeing now is going to make the one of the 19th century look like a picnic. So it will fundamentally change the world. And there will be two types of countries: those who get onto the train of these scientific and industrial revolutions, and those who don't. For us, it's a matter of survival to be part of it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And basically going off of that, the importance of integrating science, right, within the foreign policies, with the country's engagements with others. Switzerland has been sending science counselors, attachés to different countries for many years now. So what having a dedicated science and technology office, for example, within the embassy and the SwissNext network around the world, how does that help you during your posting here, for example, in Washington?
So I have to start a little bit earlier and to tell you that Switzerland is a country that has been blessed. It has been blessed by having no natural resources and no access to the sea. So the only way we could develop the country was to develop high technology and industries that were working always at the forefront of whatever humankind was doing. And so for us, realizing what made Switzerland a rich country, because Switzerland has been a rich country only for a little bit more than a century. Before, we were one of the poorest countries in Europe because we had nothing. And it started really changing the moment Switzerland developed both a very robust scientific and industrial network. And frankly, in the 90s, when the dot-com revolution started and the Swiss people, our forebears, realized how important it was to be present in the US, and it was the onset or the beginning of SwissNext and the idea that we should send dedicated specialists in science to understand what was happening in this new revolution. Why did it start in Boston? Because Boston was the first cluster. Now everyone is speaking about clusters, but back then Boston was the first cluster where you had top research universities, top institutes, top industries, and it was gathering the best brains, mostly in medtech, because Boston was medtech. Since the 90s, many other regions of the United States have been emulating what Boston has been doing, and we have been emulating it too in Switzerland. And some European countries have also understood how important it is to create these centers of excellence. We went to Boston first, and then we realized how it helped not only Swiss academia, but also the Swiss industries, not to lose the contact with the most advanced science.
Right. And the next question goes very much along the lines of what you just said. Switzerland, it's a small country, right? But despite being a small country, very beautiful country, it's been leading, right, the science diplomacy aspect, integrating the scientists within foreign policy objectives, the bilateral, multilateral agreements. So now I would like to ask you, what has the Swiss science diplomacy agenda been like, and how has it changed, and where is it going?
It all started in the second half of the 19th century when Switzerland, after the Liberal Revolution, realized that the only way for a country like ours to survive was to be at the forefront of scientific research, and they created these two federal polytechnical institutes that are still ranked amongst the best in the world, in spite of their size. And by the way, Switzerland is the country with the highest number of science Nobel Prizes per capita. So of course we don't have as many as the United States, but per capita we have more. And really we and our grandfathers and great-grandfathers really did understand how important science was for the survival, the long-term survival of Switzerland. And so there always was a systematic cooperation, because science diplomacy is on one hand the work done by the science diplomats, but it's also the inter-academic cooperation. And Swiss universities have an incredible network of academic cooperation all over the world. When I was ambassador to Kenya, we had cooperations with Kenyan universities in different matters, from water management to climate change so it's not just with the so-called developed world, it's all over the world. We are trying to have this very strong network. At some point, the government did realize, and that was in the 90s and in the 2000s, that we also needed to have the diplomats try and increase the intensity of academic and scientific exchange. And we were given the means to do that. And we are really, really grateful for it, because in the long term, it creates wealth, it creates jobs, it creates access to new technologies. So science diplomacy is now part and parcel of really diplomatic work that any Swiss diplomat is supposed to do.
And that's very encouraging to hear. We don't see that more. In multiple countries, where we would assume that, for example, they have that embedded within their systems, but they don't. So you're leading that. So we're thankful.
We are very glad, and I'm very glad to represent a country that's a leader in this. And it's not my work, because I took over from generations of diplomats who have been working on it. But for the past 5 years, I can say frankly that certainly a fifth, if not more, of my time has been devoted to Swiss diplomacy. And we have been doing a lot of efforts also to show and to showcase the presence of Switzerland in science. We have created this website called Swiss Impact. And on Swiss Impact, on one hand, we show the economic and cultural presence of Switzerland in the US, which, by the way, is extremely impressive. We are the 7th biggest investor in the American economy, but in research and development, we are number 3. Meaning we have only 2 competitors, Germany and Japan, and we are bigger than the rest of any other country in the world. So on one hand, we have tried to showcase the economic presence, but we have also created a network where we are mapping all the scientists, the Swiss scientists in American universities, and it's amazing, and we discover new ones all the time. And you can go to the website, you click on the region, and you will find there is a professor for quantum here, there is a professor for chemistry there, and what we are also trying to do is to make sure that these people know each other, so as to create a network that will make us be informed early enough in case of a new research project that could be interesting for a Swiss university. And so every month, I think, in these 5 years, except maybe during COVID, we had some sort of a scientific delegation in the US. Because frankly, now you're looking at the scientific developments that are going to define the 21st century, all the key technologies that are going to define the 21st century, the US is leading or co-leading in each and one of them. So we can't just sit on our hands and wait for it to happen. We need to be here. We need to have our fundamental researchers and also our applied researchers be able to work with the American universities.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you mentioned Swiss Impact. That's something we'll touch on in just a second. But before that, as the governments are trying to deal with the technologies that are emerging, for example, there's not only the good side to what we're seeing being developed, AI, quantum, for example, there's also the other flip side. So do you think the governments are facing these technologies in the right way, putting enough emphasis on both the potential benefits and also the drawbacks of such technologies?
I think that I'll be a little bit sarcastic. You know, there are two approaches to the new technologies. There is the European approach in the sense of EU approach, which is to start regulating a technology even before it exists. Or there is the American approach, which is to let it develop and then realize that there are drawbacks and then start legislating. Ours is a slightly different approach. As usual, it's one of compromise. So we are trying to anticipate, and this is the reason why the Swiss government has created in Geneva a foundation called GESDA, and it's about anticipation in science, analyzing these new technologies, understanding where the challenges and the opportunities are, and trying to make the political decision makers realize what is at stake. And the interesting thing is we have tried and we have actually managed to gather some of the best brains in the world, not just in Switzerland, some of the best scientific brains, and they are meeting regularly to discuss the challenges of, say, AI or of quantum or of fusion. What does it mean for the future of humankind, and how can we mitigate the risks without stifling the development? Because the whole key, the walk on the tightrope that all governments will have to follow is how do you, on one hand, give enough space for science to develop without letting the worst possible scenarios happen? And that's a very difficult challenge.
That's diplomacy, right?
And that is definitely diplomacy, and it's a part of diplomacy that is totally fascinating because it's not a reactive diplomacy, it's a proactive diplomacy. So how do we try to do something that's going ultimately to serve humankind?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've seen, for example, in the United States as well. We need to be proactive, like you said, not just waiting until it happens.
Yes.
Let's say when quantum computing happens, we need to be ready for that beforehand. So again,
quantum is an extraordinary example of how the cooperation between the two countries, between Switzerland and the US, can happen. We still have some of the best fundamental research in quantum in Switzerland, especially at the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. At the same time, it's obvious that industrial applications of quantum technology will happen in the US. All the most advanced companies, in spite of some countries claiming that they have already achieved, but if we look at it like seriously, it's happening here in the US. And we have put a very strong emphasis the last 2 years trying to draw American companies to do their applied research in Switzerland as their European headquarters, and to have our quantum researchers be aware of what's happening in the industrial application. And so this is a very noble example of science diplomacy, because it's pooling all the best brains together and pooling what Americans do best, which is applied research, with the fundamental research that we are really good at. So good.
Is that something, for example, the Quantum Basel, right,
Yeah.
initiative with IonQ, if I'm
So we were
doing.
very proud and very glad to be able to convince IonQ, which is one of these companies that certainly at some point will develop industrial applications of quantum, to draw them to Basel. Why to Basel? Because they're close to Zurich, where there is this Federal Institute and the fundamental quantum research, and they're in Basel, which is one of the two leading centers in the world of the pharmaceutical industries, meaning terabytes and terabytes of data that can be used to further the practical application of quantum.
So that actually goes very much along the lines of what we were saying about the Swiss Impact, right? That there's such a dense flow of technology and knowledge sharing between the two countries, and how many jobs are being created. So something like Quantum Basel, for example, IonQ exchange, would you want to highlight that as something Swiss Impact?
It's one of the many examples. I would like to highlight what's happening in space. Only the United States of America is able to produce something like the James Webb Telescope or like the Mars rover. But within the James Webb Telescope, within the Mars rover, there are key pieces of technology that only the Swiss can provide. I'll give you an example. The Mars rover needed a drone, a helicopter that could fly in the atmosphere of Mars, which is 7 times thinner than the atmosphere of the Earth, without overheating. And the specifications that it should be able to do one flight of 15 minutes. And 72 flights later, the Swiss helicopter is still flying. Mars rover is going down, but the Swiss helicopter is still flying. Or on the James Webb Telescope, the micro engines that had to extend these protection foils to protect the cold side of the James Webb from the sun. It had to be done with a level of precision that actually only the Swiss were able to provide. And so this is the Swiss impact. There is not a single spacecraft leaving American territory that doesn't have somewhere a piece of Swiss technology in it. We will never produce a James Webb Telescope. We don't have the industrial base to be able to do that. But we can always provide the key technology, be it in optics, optronics, it can be photonics, where we have micro engines, macro technology in general, medtech. Wherever you look, you will find these very specific. And the interesting thing about what's happening in Switzerland is that more than 80% of our economy is SMEs. So there are small and medium enterprises really specialized in a specific field and delivering things that no one else can.
Mm. And also going with the space line, you're not only delivering these details of the technology that are crucial to make such advancements happen, but also the educational aspect, right? At ETH Zurich, we have the space, right?
In
program.
the end, when you're a country with no natural resources, the only wealth, the only chance that you have to prevail is education. And the educational system in Switzerland is definitely one of the best in the world. I'm not going to claim it's the best, but it's definitely one of the best. And what is really special in our system is that we are not, like the US, totally obsessed with academic education, with college degrees, but 2/3 of our population don't go to college, but they learn their trade in very specific sectors. And it gives us a whole population of, we call them engineers, who know how to hold a screwdriver. They have not only studied a screwdriver at university and they could draw a screwdriver, but they don't know how to use it. These are the people who do then the real work of creating the piece of technology these are amazing people, and it gives us a massive advantage.
Right, and that's like the vocational training. Right?
It's the vocational training,
which the US is learning about, right?
It's definitely one of the keys of our industrial success is the vocational training. Without vocational training, we would never be where we are today.
Right, and I just noticed myself, for example, Colorado, right?
Yeah.
It's one of the states, at least I am aware of, that is trying to develop something like that for vocational training. And it's
part of, it's not strictly science diplomacy, but it is also science diplomacy. We've been working with a whole series of American states to help them introduce something similar to our vocational training system, because the Swiss industry is investing more and more in the American economy. But the problem for investing in the American economy is you can build a factory, but you need the workers. And to fill all the jobs of skilled workers is extremely difficult in the US, because there is this gap. You have the college degree holders, and then the people who have been working in different sectors but are not specialized. And now that the US is moving more and more towards introducing more high-tech industries, they will need the skilled workforce, and they need us to help them create it.
Exactly. No, I agree completely. In quantum, let's say.
Quantum is.
We need people.
And the practical work. It's not like you're building a road or you're building a bridge.
Exactly.
You need people who understand microtechnics and are able to produce chips and whatever. You don't train them in a day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You need to start early too.
It's years.
Right.
It's actually years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm glad that in Switzerland, students have this ability to start early, right, and to choose how they want to progress in their career, whether it's hands-on, for example, knowing how a screwdriver works, or whether.
But they still have the opportunity
and they
later
still have the
on
opportunity
if they
to go
want
back.
to move
Exactly.
on to a college education.
Right.
But at least you start with a real job and you start being paid. At age 16, you're being paid, you're being trained properly. And when you reach age 20, you have a job that it will be decently paid and you don't have a student debt.
Right.
It helps.
Oh, it does. So
yeah.
With that, last question for today is Switzerland. A lot of people know it's a hotspot where scientists, politicians, diplomats, they convene together to innovate, to think, to brainstorm. So what about Switzerland, you know, the special neutral state of the country? Is there some kind of key ingredient in this complex recipe that makes such collaborations like CERN happen, you know, and how do we enhance this connection between the worlds of science, policy, diplomacy? There are many things we do, for example, spontaneous interactions, let's say a cocktail reception or science diplomacy events like the Hub here does, or sending delegations to organizations. So how does this happen? What's best for us to do?
I would say, you know, the convening power of Switzerland as a country is totally disproportionate to the actual size of the population, definitely, and the geography also. Maybe a little bit less to the size of the economy because we are the 20th biggest economy in the world. But I think it has to do with the fact that we are generally considered to be honest brokers. We don't have a colonial past. So we don't have a post-colonial policy. We are politically neutral, or at least militarily neutral, because neutrality doesn't mean that we have a neutrality of values. On values, we clearly belong to the camp of the democracies and the liberal countries. But it gives us a certain credibility that if we convene a discussion about the dangers of the future technologies, there is no hidden plan behind this, and we are not trying to push our own interest. It's about pushing the interests of humankind in general. So yes, we have an inordinate convening power, and we fully intend to keep it.
I'm glad to hear that. So
thank you.
With that, I'd like to thank you for this wonderful conversation on all things science diplomacy. I'm impressed by your space diplomacy knowledge. I would not know that, but what you just mentioned about these electronics, the details there. So thank you for that. And to our audience, thank you for joining us. And we hope you stay in touch with us and stay tuned.